All right. So we're going to be talking about affirmative action. We've been talking about civil rights. And affirmative action is just kind of like where that kind of comes to a head. Um, our goals is that you can talk about what affirmative action is, um, and then talk about some of the Supreme Court cases around it, and then this will shrink. There we go. And then a little bit about like how that relates to the 14th Amendment. So affirmative action is definitely like a trigger thing. It makes a lot of people angry or excited one way or another. Most people have, if they have an opinion on it, they usually have a strong one. Um, and what affirmative action is, in its simplest form, is preferential treatment for minority groups over the majority. Um, Usually with the purpose or goal of trying to right previous wrongs that came as a result of slavery and segregation. Um, we'll come back to this one. So the Supreme Court has talked about affirmative action only a handful of times. The first one time the thing I want to talk about with that is Regents of University of California versus Bakey. Um, and this is one of the probably more important Supreme Court cases we talk about, and it's also probably one of the most confusing, mostly because of that last point. Um, there wasn't a majority decision, rather there was a plurality decision made, which is not a common thing. You had 6 written opinions and 9 judges. Um, so the court was very divided over the idea of affirmative action. In the case, they would essentially affirm that affirmative action is okay under the Constitution, but there are limits to it. In this particular case, essentially they were looking at the medical school, and there was 100 seats available for each incoming class, and the school reserved 16 of those spaces for minority students. And the Supreme Court would say affirmative action is okay, but setting a quota or a number to be met becomes unconstitutional because that has the potential to discriminate and intentionally discriminates. Um, so that was the plurality decision. There was by no means a majority, and that case happens back in the 70s. There's a video link here. This what Bakey means. I linked a YouTube video to it. It's the same video in your Supreme Court assignment, which I didn't talk about. You have 3 more cases this week. That should be the end of your civil rights cases. Oh, I didn't even notice that he joined. Ooh. Who else here? We have an extra person, I think. Oh no, I get counted twice. I was like, why do we have 9 now? This should be the last of your civil rights cases that we're going to worry about. Um, so you have 3 more of those. There's a video with each of them. Yeah. Are you all looking at the slide again? Just someone say yes. Okay, cool. Did it go to the other thing a second ago that showed the 3? Okay. And you all should be more than familiar with those Supreme Court case write-ups at this point. They should be your favorite thing. They're like vocab for us almost. I feel like they're vocab. So that first case happened in the 70s. The Supreme Court wouldn't revisit it, and the idea of like affirmative action in that sense until the early 2000s, and it would address it twice in the same day, which is unfortunate because it's Grutter versus Bollinger and Gratz versus Bollinger, which is just unfortunate. You can click on, since both happened at Michigan, click on the little Michigan, it'll take you to a video and discusses both of them in the same video. Um, and it affirms the fact that race can be used as a factor when admitting students, so long as it's not the only factor or the most important factor when admitting students. Um, so in Grutter, the court ruled in favor of the university, and the university was trying to reach what they called a critical mass of minority students, citing that the university benefited from having a vast array of minorities and perspectives present on campus, and that it would benefit not only the college but the university and the general populace. And the Supreme Court agreed with that decision. It said there is no explicit racism, just a desire to benefit students and increase learning. Whereas in Gratz, they ruled against the university because they found that students were getting points towards admission based on race, and so that minority students were almost guaranteed acceptance. I see someone has made a comment. Oh, okay. Yeah, they were literally argued on the same day. That's just rough. So this brings up the concept and the question of, is the Constitution colorblind, and does the 14th Amendment prohibit race-based legal distinctions, or does it merely prohibit race-based legal distinctions intended to harm? So does it ban all racial distinctions, or only those with intent to harm? And the court is very split on this. Most decisions that have to do with this question, and we may visit a few more next semester, but you're going to see that they are quite literally almost all 5-4 decisions, meaning the court was entirely split on the issue. So a lot of this comes down to this question of like balancing of minority and majority rights. And all of that goes all the way back to Brown v. Board, which you all are familiar with. I don't even have to ask if you're familiar with it. You know what it does. It ends segregation in schools, all right? And it uses the 14th Amendment to do that. And that is what's going to bring us back to that colorblind Constitution question. And so Brown v. Board has been used more in terms of legal precedent of saying the Constitution is colorblind, almost more than it has been used to end segregation. So the next case I want to look at, and this is going to bring us into an entirely different world of political debate, is Shaw versus Reno. This is an early 90s case, and this has to do with gerrymandering. I meant to tag that video here in the slides, but it is on your vocab sheet. The link is right there on it. And what it's going to do is ban racial gerrymandering. It does not get rid of gerrymandering in its entirety. Essentially, this brings us this idea that you can draw districts however you want in a state, and you can even factor race into how those districts are drawn, so long as that race is not the only factor in how they're drawn. The video is going to show lots of pictures, and that's what I thought I'd put on here, which apparently I didn't. I must have like accidentally deleted it. I'm not sure what I did. And it shows how some congressional districts across the country are going to be like absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we get the term gerrymander from a district that kind of looks like a salamander. There was a newspaper article on it printed in the day, and that's kind of where it wasn't a salamander, it was a gerrymander. Anyway, it was. I guess they thought it was funny. But you're going to see districts that start showing. You see like literal almost circles drawn around minority neighborhoods, with thin strips of land connecting them all over the states, that are clearly designed by racial group. And that's what's going to be banned. The United States still allows like the party in power in each state to draw the district maps rather than forcing the use of third party groups to do it, such like they do in Canada and many other democratic nations. And we're going to look at gerrymandering a bit more in a future module. For now, I'm looking at it more from the 14th Amendment perspective of racial-based policy. So that's what I want you all to think about. We're going to move into a discussion here in a bit. So your discussion question this week, and I figured I'd give you all a benefit to being here, since I'm excited that you're all here in person. We would take some time. Hang on. Let me go back. We could debate this here in person rather than like typing out your thoughts and leaving it there. Now you're perfectly welcome to post on Canvas if you don't wish to discuss here, but I would prefer it if you discussed here. And I want to know what you all think about affirmative action. It is often called a form of discrimination. While most acknowledges that there are good intentions behind it, they still claim that it is, in fact, discrimination that can potentially do harm. What do you all think? Should affirmative action policies be allowed to exist? Like, should we use them? Are they beneficial? You're all, almost all of you are muted, and if you're saying something, you gotta unmute. All right.
Where has affirmative action been used other than just the colleges?
You see affirmative action also shows up in reparation payments would be a form of affirmative action. Companies setting like requirements to hire minority groups. So like if you have like an engineering firm intentionally hiring minority employees, that would be affirmative action. Anytime anyone has a policy of favoring a minority over the majority to build a more diverse environment, that would be considered affirmative action. So schools intentionally hiring minority teachers, or we talked about businesses hiring people of different minority groups, colleges enrolling students of minority groups for the sake of diversity. For the moment, those are the main things that are coming to my mind, and do any of you have a situation in which another one that comes to mind off the top of your head?
I feel like it could be not discriminatory because I know that some other races, they just have a harder time getting a chance of working in such situations. So having an affirmative action like that will give them the job and the opportunity to reach higher goals and not just whitewash those certain places. There's benefits to having minorities in a certain area too. It just better mixes the plate up. It just creates a better further.
I like that. Mixes the plate up.
What was that?
I said I like that your mixes the plate up comment.
Yeah.
It's a good way of summing it up. So it does good. Is it discrimination?
Even if it
discrimination, I would say the reverse is even more so. It's like you can have it to where, yeah, this requires you to hire people of certain races, but like if that wasn't the case, then it would be like it was back in the Jim Crow days, where you could hire people just because they weren't black. Just because they weren't white or something like that. Like, you have this, sure, but the reverse could be completely worse.
All right. I hear that. Perry, what do you think? Oh, is it discrimination?
No, I mean, I was asking what about what Matthew said. I didn't really get the gist.
So, like, you have affirmative action. It's a policy that requires you to hire certain people of certain races, right?
No, it's not. It says you can consider it. You can't hire based on race.
Okay. Well, excuse me, it's a little early in the morning. So,
It, like I said, it's any policy that has to do with racial consideration in terms of hiring and the favoring of a minority. So policies, at present, the Supreme Court says policies that it would encourage the favoring of minorities is okay as long as there's not like a fixed quota or a fixed like it doesn't like guarantee you the job, but it can be a factor. So I think you're both kind of in the right ballpark on that. Should affirmative action be considered constitutional? What do you think? The Supreme Court's definitely not firm on the issue.
Um, this is unrelated, but I think the framing of the issue is interesting in that legacy admissions are a much greater factor,
Mm-hmm.
right, than race at all. So like people think they're not getting, or like, I've heard white people like complaining like I'm not going to get into X school because they give preferential status to a minority, when in reality it's more like they're giving preferential status to people whose parents have gone there.
Mm. Well, I mean, could that not also have some interesting racial consequences given our history?
I think the issue is more like academic opportunity. And I was reading something about like you can have straight A's, but if your school doesn't offer like advanced courses or higher level, then it won't really mean anything to a lot of like really exclusive colleges. So in that sense, if you're poor, you're pretty much screwed no matter what your race is. So in that aspect, affirmative action isn't the most fair thing, in that it fails to take into account class issues and just
Mm-hmm. No, class. I could see where class definitely has something to do with it. I think that's what Maria was saying. Can you all see what she said in the chat? Like on here on Google, not on Canvas.
yeah.
Yeah. I think her and Terry are on similar wavelengths on this one. She's asserting that it equals out the playing field. Yeah.
I think it definitely tries to, or I don't know. I don't want to give colleges the benefit of the doubt because they don't really care about people and it's more about profit. But I think that affirmative action isn't inherently bad, but it could be much better in its scope.
I think I think I hear what you're saying. How would you, if you were to make it better, if you were a deity in control of the universe, how would you make it better?
And that you need to look at economic or socioeconomic opportunities as opposed to just race. And that, like, if you're white and poor and growing up in, like, the middle of Appalachia, or you're Oprah's child, one person is clearly going to have a harder time succeeding in life. But if you're just looking at it from, like, this person comes from an oppressed racial background, then Oprah's relative would have it.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. What about the rest of you? What do you think about that? They're not joining us. No, Terry, I really think you're onto something there. I think affirmative action could definitely be expanded to take into account, like economic standing. What? Oh, okay.
But then I have the question, if it's based on economic standing instead of race, is it still affirmative action because it's an economic minority, or just something?
Well, I don't know. If you're favoring the lower classes, you all of a sudden you're talking about favoring the economic majority as a policy.
I think we may be on different pages here.
Potentially. Matthew, what do you have any thoughts to weigh in?
I mean, no, not right now. I haven't really thought of anything, so
Okay.
just letting the conversation happen.
Yeah. By that I mean, I think what we're kind of, both of us are. I think you're paying more attention to the middle class, and I probably should also. I think you have a better.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, you're not?
No, I'm saying, like, poor people, and that, like, if you're from, like, a regular suburban area, you'll have roughly the similar opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're poor, you're kind of screwed when it comes to college admissions.
Yeah, and I mean that has a lot to do with like the schools available to you in that area.
Yeah.
So your rural populations are going to be significantly disadvantaged in terms of college admission, especially into higher level schools.
Mm-hmm.
Which also raises an interesting question of they are going to be almost a super majority, like white, when that fall into that category.
I don't think so. Like, yeah, rural people aren't going to have access to good schools, but in the same way, if you come from, if you're like in an inner city community where schools aren't good, it's going to be similar conditions.
True, I guess that's fair. That is fair. Oh. Oh. Naomi, Leon, you have thoughts? I haven't heard from you, either of you. No. That's okay. So switching gears a little bit on beyond whether it's good or bad, should it be considered constitutional when we look at the 14th Amendment? No.
I guess not yet. I think it still has to be built up, like Terry said. They can be improved before it gets placed.
You're going to have to repeat that. It was kind of jumbled on my end.
It's gonna have to be more improved and refined. it gets into a position that
I hear you. Okay. So, in order to be constitutional, there needs to be greater, like, restrictions put into place.
Yeah.
Okay. I hear you there. Matthew, Terry, do y'all have thoughts on, like, whether or not it should be considered constitutional? If you all were approached for an opinion toward the Supreme Court? You're fine, Maria. I kind of assumed that's what happened.
because right now it sounds a little bit more vague than
I mean, the issue itself has a lot of vagueness in the question.
I think Lara's right when he says it's really vague, and I think that's the only reason it can still exist. Because if you said more specifically, like, here's how we're going to use race as a factor, and like there was an exact methodology to it, in that case it would probably be more likely to get like ruled unconstitutional. But because it's very simply just like you can consider race, that allows it to continue.
Yeah. It's so loose in its phrasing, but that's almost its strongest defense in terms of the Constitution for a lot of what we've seen legally. Here in the last few years, California's actually gone as far as to ban using race as any kind of a factor, and at least for college admissions and for work application. But that is in the state of California, which is not the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because this question of can it be allowed at all comes out of California, where we get our yes, this can be allowed and it can be a factor. But that's just my irony for the day. What other thoughts do y'all have on this?
I feel like California is very much diverse enough to be able to make a decision like that.
That's actually probably very true. California is probably one of our most diverse states.
Yeah.
So like the need for it doesn't exist as much.
Yeah.
I believe it was in the first 2003 case, the Gutter, I don't know how to pronounce that name, I apologize, versus Bollinger case, where the judges asserted that hopefully, while it is constitutional, hopefully in 25 years, it shouldn't be an issue at all. And I think that in the state case of California, you might be right that they may have reached that point.
Because many of them are liberal, and they have a huge Asian American minority population. It's just different from, if you look at the Asian minority there, it's different from all the Asian American minority everywhere.
Oh yeah.
They have a different type of personality too, because they were raised with I don't know, I guess much more confidence and acceptance. Different personality. You can,
Yeah, no. California is unique in that it has so many different massive minority groups, because you have a huge population of people of Latina descent and Hispanic descent, and you have people of Asian descent and Middle Eastern descent. They don't have the largest Middle Eastern population, but you really don't have that anywhere in the U.S., where you have a very large, significantly large group, all kind of mixed together. Yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate you joining me. If you're looking at your Supreme Court cases for this week, I actually talked about two of them. The only one we didn't talk about in here was the last one on your sheet, which is Baker versus Carr. And so that will leave you at least one to go explore on your own. That said, I don't have anything else for you all. I'll give you your morning, give you some time, let you eat, take a nap. Do you all have any questions or final thoughts that you'd like to share, points of debate?
No.
All right. Well, feel free to stick around if you have questions, but if not, you all are free to go. Thank you for sticking around and talking about the issue with me.